You know what? I thought I had seen everything in my 3 centuries as a professor at the Galactic Education Council's most prestigious academy. Hey, shows how much this old Zentorian knew, right? Let me set the scene for you, Nexus Prime Academy, perched on the crystal cliffs of the most civilized planet in the galaxy. We're talking about an institution so advanced that we have floating libraries, gravity-defying lecture halls, teas and coffee machines that can brew beverages for 73 different species. Not to mention students from every corner of known space, all here to receive the finest education the galaxy has to offer. So naturally, when I received word that we were getting an exchange student from some backwater rock called Earth, I wasn't exactly thrilled. The paperwork classified it as a recently contacted civilization with primitive technology and limited space travel capabilities. Great. Just great. Another mouth-breathing savage I'd have to babysit through basic galactic history 101. The transport shuttle arrived on a Tuesday morning, and out stepped what I can only describe as the most unremarkable bipedal creature I'd ever seen. Emma Blackwood, the Manifest Red. Average height, brown hair tied back in some sort of practical arrangement, wearing what appeared to be simple fabric coverings. She looked around the landing platform with those small, dark eyes of hers, taking in the floating spires and energy cascades like she was like she was impressed but not exactly shocked. Professor Vortesh? Her voice had this peculiar accent, all drawn-out vowels and clipped consonants. But I'm Emma. Thanks for having me at your academy. I gave her my most professional smile, the one I reserve for donors' children and other necessary inconveniences. Welcome to Nexus Prime Academy, Miss Blackwood. I trust your journey wasn't too arduous for someone of your technological limitations? She just grinned. Actually grinned. Oh, no worries, Professor. I've had worse trips. Once got stuck in a ute for 6 hours during a bushfire evacuation. This was a piece of cake compared to that. I had no idea what a ute or a bushfire was, but I nodded knowingly anyway. Primitive transportation and natural disasters, no doubt. How quaint. As we walked through the academy's main corridors, Emma kept asking the strangest questions. Not about our advanced technology or the magnificent architecture, mind you. No, she wanted to know about safety protocols. So, what's the emergency evacuation procedure if something goes wrong? She asked, studying the floating platforms with apparent interest. Well, I replied, puffing up with pride, we have the most advanced safety systems in the galaxy. Force fields, emergency teleportation, automated medical response. Right? But what if those systems fail? Like, what's the backup plan? I blinked all 4 of my eyes at her. Fail? Miss Blackwood, our systems don't fail. This is Nexus Prime Academy, not some primitive. Sure, she interrupted with a wave of her hand. But hypothetically speaking, what would you do if, say, the power went out and the teleporters stopped working? That's simply not possible, I stammered. Huh. She made a non-committal sound. Back home, we always have at least 3 backup plans. You know, in case the dropped bears get in the walls again. The other students we'd picked up along the way, a young crystalline from the Andromeda sector, a promising Vorthak pupil, and 2 exchange students from the Rigel system, you all stopped walking and stared at her. Drop bears? Asked Zara, the crystalline, her voice tinkling like wind chimes. Oh yeah, Emma said casually, adjusting her bag strap. Nasty little buggers. Look like koalas, but they'll drop out of trees and maul you if you're not careful. Lost 3 neighbors to them last year. Well, 2 neighbors and Mrs. Henderson's cat, but Fluffy was practically family. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear the gears grinding in these young minds as they tried to process what they'd just heard. Miss Blackwood, I said, using my most patient professor voice, I'm sure your planet has many colorful folktales, but perhaps we should focus on more academic matters? Folktales? Emma looked genuinely confused. Professor, I've got the scars to prove it. Here, look at this one on my arm. That won't be necessary, I said quickly, steering the group toward the dormitories. Human folklore is quite fascinating, I'm sure, but let's get you settled in first, shall we? As we continued our tour, I made a mental note to research Earth's cultural practices. Clearly, these humans had developed some rather vivid mythologies to cope with their primitive existence. Drop bears, indeed. What would they think of next? If only I'd known then what I know now. If only I'd listened a little closer to what Emma Blackwood was actually trying to tell us. But hey, hindsight is 20/20, as the humans say. And trust me, I was about to get a very clear view of just how wrong I'd been about everything. The next morning, I strutted into my advanced xenobiology classroom feeling particularly pleased with myself. Today's topic? Dangerous predators across the galaxy, one of my absolute favorite lectures. Nothing quite like watching young minds recoil in horror at the universe's most terrifying creatures. Today, class, I began activating the holographic display with a flourish. We'll be examining the apex predators that have shaped evolutionary development across known space. The first image materialized, a towering, six-legged nightmare from the Vega system. Behold the vegan bone crusher, standing 12 feet tall with mandibles capable of snapping through titanium alloy. This magnificent beast has claimed over 300 lives in the past century alone. A collective gasp rippled through the classroom. Perfect. I lived for these moments. And here, I continued, switching to the next hologram, we have the regal phantom stalker. Invisible to most detection systems, it hunts by tracking the electrical impulses of its prey's nervous system. Absolutely unstoppable, once it's locked onto a target. More satisfying sounds of terror from my students. Even Emma seemed to be paying attention, though she had this odd expression on her face. Almost like she was trying not to laugh. Now then, I said, puffing out my chest scales, these represent the pinnacle of predatory evolution. The most dangerous creatures in the known galaxy. Each one a perfect killing machine, honed by millions of years of. Excuse me, Professor? Emma's hand shot up politely. Yes, Miss Blackwood? Would you like to hear about some of the pets we keep back home? Pets. I blinked slowly. I suppose that would be educational. Though I hardly think Earth's domestic animals would be relevant to a discussion about galactic apex predators. Oh, these aren't really domestic, Emma said, standing up with that same casual confidence she'd shown yesterday. Or like neighborhood wildlife. You know, the usual suspects you find hanging around Australian backyards. She tapped her wrist device, and a holographic projection appeared. The entire class leaned forward, expecting to see some fluffy, harmless creature. What they saw instead made half the students immediately scoot their chairs backward. This little beauty, Emma said cheerfully, is a Sydney funnel web spider. Now, I know what you're thinking, it's only about this big. She held up her thumb and forefinger, showing a gap of maybe 2 inches. But don't let the size fool you. These guys pack enough venom to kill a grown human in about 15 minutes. Oh, and they're aggressive little buggers too. They'll actually chase you if you annoy them. The crystalline student, Zara, made a sound like breaking glass. It pursues its prey? Absolutely. And here's the fun part. Their fangs are so strong they can bite through fingernails. Sometimes they get stuck in shoes and just keep biting until they die. Persistent little fellas. I felt my scales beginning to itch. Miss Blackwood, surely you're exaggerating for effect. Oh, no worries, Professor. I've got proof. Emma's projection switched to what appeared to be a news report. This is from last month. Local bloke found one in his sock drawer. Had to burn the whole house down. Well, not really, but you get the idea. The classroom had gone dead silent. Even I was starting to feel a bit queasy. Now, this next one's a real showstopper, Emma continued, completely oblivious to the growing horror around her. A box jellyfish. Practically invisible in the water, tentacles up to 10 feet long, and enough toxin to kill 60 adult humans. We call them sea wasps because they're just as friendly as they sound. The projection showed a translucent, floating nightmare that pulsed through tropical waters. One of the Vorthax students actually fainted. The really fun part, Emma went on, is that the pain from their sting is so intense that victims often go into shock and drown before the venom even kicks in. But hey, at least it's quick, right? My throat felt dry. Miss Blackwood, these creatures, they actually exist in your planet's oceans? Oh, absolutely. Swimming season's always an adventure. But wait, there's more. She switched to another image. This little guy's my personal favorite, the blue ringed octopus, about the size of a golf ball, but carrying enough venom to kill 26 adults. And here's the kicker, there's no antidote. The octopus in the projection was almost beautiful, its skin pulsing with electric blue rings. Until you realize those rings were a warning sign. The venom causes total paralysis, Emma explained matter-of-factly. You're completely conscious the whole time, but can't move or speak. Pretty much the perfect murder weapon if you think about it. By now, half my class was either pale green or had their heads between their knees. The other half was staring at Emma like she'd just confessed to being a serial killer. Miss Blackwood, I managed to croak. How do your people survive on such a planet? Emma shrugged. You learn to watch where you step, check your shoes, and never, ever swim alone. Plus, most of these guys are pretty reasonable if you don't mess with them first. Most of them? Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, these are just the cute ones from around Sydney. You should see what we've got in the outback. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop. If anyone had been brave enough to move, that is. I stared at my holographic display of the galaxy's most dangerous predators and felt a creeping realization that maybe, just maybe, I'd been teaching this class all wrong. Miss Blackwood, I said slowly, exactly how many of these creatures live near your home? Emma brightened. Oh, heaps. These are just the ones I could remember off the top of my head. Want to see the snakes? 2 days later, I was still having nightmares about blue-ringed octopi. But being the dedicated educator I am, I pressed on with my curriculum. Today's Galactic Studies class was supposed to be a nice, safe topic, habitable world conditions and civilization development. As we all know, I began trying to project confidence I didn't quite feel anymore. Advanced civilizations can only develop on planets with stable, predictable environments. Consistent weather patterns, manageable geological activity, and minimal natural disasters are the cornerstones of technological progress. I gestured to the star chart behind me. Take Nexus Prime, for example. Our climate varies by no more than 5 degrees year-round. Our worst natural disaster in recorded history was a light drizzle that lasted 3 days. This stability allowed our ancestors to focus on scientific advancement rather than mere survival. The class nodded approvingly. Even Emma seemed to be listening intently, though she had that same peculiar expression from yesterday, like she was holding back some sort of internal explosion. Now then, I continued, who can give me an example of how environmental stability contributes to civilizational development? Several hands shot up, but Emma's voice cut through the air before I could call on anyone. Actually, Professor, would it be all right if I told you about my home continent? You know, as a sort of case study, every instinct I had screamed at me to say no. But academic curiosity, and let's be honest, a morbid fascination with whatever horror Emma was about to unleash, got the better of me. Very well, Miss Blackwood. Please, enlighten us about your stable environment. Emma stood up and activated her holographic display. The image showed a massive landmass, brown and green and absolutely enormous. Right, so this is Australia. Now I know what you're thinking. Looks pretty peaceful from up here, doesn't it? Well, let me tell you about our summer weather patterns. The first image made my blood run cold. Literally, it showed a massive spiral of fire spinning across the landscape like some sort of apocalyptic tornado. These are what we call fire tornadoes, Emma explained casually. They pop up during bushfire season, which is basically half the year. Sometimes they get big enough to create their own weather systems. Pretty spectacular, really. One of the Regal students raised a trembling appendage. Ms. Blackwood, how do your people survive such phenomena? Oh, you learn to read the signs. When the sky turns orange and the birds start fleeing, you know it's time to grab a cold one and wait it out. Unless you're in the path of the tornado, in which case you run like hell. The projection switched to what looked like a completely melted road surface. And here's what happens when it hits 48 degrees Celsius. The roads literally melt. Sometimes car tires get stuck, and you have to abandon your vehicle. But hey, at least you know it's going to be a proper summer. I felt my scales starting to shed from stress. 48 degrees? That's approaching the boiling point of water. Yeah, it gets toasty. But that's nothing compared to the wet season. Emma's projection showed what could only be described as an inland sea where land should have been. This is Queensland during flood season. The water can cover areas larger than most of your member planets. Just swallows up entire towns for months at a time. The classroom had gone completely silent, except for the sound of several students hyperventilating. Now, the really fun part, Emma continued with that same cheerful tone, is when cyclones decide to join the party. Category 5 storms with winds that can literally relocate houses. We name them like they're old friends. Cyclone Tracy, Cyclone Yassi, friendly bunch, really. I was frantically tapping my data pad, trying to access Earth's environmental classification files. Surely our databases had missed something. Surely no civilized species could survive in such conditions. Miss Blackwood, I stammered, how do your people respond to these catastrophic events? Emma shrugged. Same way we respond to everything else. Throw another shrimp on the Barbie and get on with it. Though technically we call them prawns. Shrimp on the Barbie is just what we tell tourists. You cook food during natural disasters? Well, yeah. What else are you going to do? Sit around and worry? Life's too short for that. Besides, the power's usually out anyway, so might as well fire up the gas barbecue and make the best of it. The data pad in my hands was displaying Earth's actual environmental classification. My eyes widened as I read extreme weather variability, frequent natural disasters, hostile fauna, recommended settlement classification, uninhabitable. Miss Blackwood, I said slowly, according to our databases, your planet is classified as uninhabitable. Emma laughed, actually laughed. Yeah, that sounds about right. Though I reckon whoever wrote that report never tried our meat pies. They're worth risking a bit of extreme weather for. But how do you maintain technological civilization under such conditions? You adapt. Build better. Plan ahead. And learn to laugh at the absurdity of it all. I mean, what's the point of getting stressed about things you can't control? Besides, the constant challenges keep life interesting. She switched to another image, this one showing people actually barbecuing while smoke from distant fires filled the sky. This was taken during the last big bushfire season. That's my Uncle Bob there, flipping steaks while half the country burns behind him. He said the smoke added flavor. I stared at the image in complete incomprehension. These humans were barbecuing during an environmental catastrophe, and they looked happy. Oh, and that's just summer, Emma added with that devastating casual tone. Winter's when the really fun stuff happens. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of one student quietly sobbing. I looked at my carefully prepared lecture about stable environments and civilizational development, then at the image of humans cheerfully grilling meat while their world burned around them. Maybe it was time to revise my curriculum. By the time Cultural Appreciation Day rolled around, I was seriously considering early retirement. But duty called, and besides, how much worse could things get? Famous last words, right there. The Academy's Grand Hall had been transformed into a spectacular showcase of galactic diversity. Floating silk banners from the Andromeda Collective drifted overhead, while crystalline wind chimes from the Vega system created hauntingly beautiful melodies. The air itself shimmered with holographic art installations that responded to the viewer's emotions. "Welcome, students and faculty," announced Dean Maximilian Korath, his voice resonating through the hall's acoustics, to our annual Cultural Appreciation Day. Today we celebrate the rich traditions that make our galactic community so wonderfully diverse. The presentations began with typical elegance. The crystalline delegation performed a light dancing ceremony that literally painted rainbows across the ceiling. The Vortex students demonstrated their traditional memory weaving, creating intricate mental tapestries that told stories spanning millennia. Even the notoriously reserved Rigel contingent shared their harmonic mathematical equations that somehow made the whole room feel more peaceful. Each presentation was more sophisticated than the last. Ancient wisdom, artistic mastery, philosophical depth, everything you'd expect from advanced civilizations. Then came Emma's turn. Right then, she said, bounding up to the presentation area with a large bag slung over her shoulder, I thought I'd show you all a bit of Australian hospitality. You know, share some of our cultural traditions. She began unpacking items from her bag with the enthusiasm of someone preparing for a picnic. Now, back home, when someone visits, the first thing we do is offer them food. It's considered proper manners, you see. I felt a familiar sense of dread creeping up my spine. So I brought some traditional Australian tucker for everyone to try. Emma held up a small, dark jar with what appeared to be a cheerful yellow label. This here's Vegemite. National treasure, this is. Spread it on toast, and you've got yourself a proper breakfast. She began opening the jar, and immediately the air filled with a smell that can only be described as well. Imagine if someone had fermented seaweed in a gymnasium sock for several months. The scent hit the assembled crowd like a physical force. Now, I know what you're thinking, Emma continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that half the audience was covering their breathing apparatus. It's got a bit of a strong aroma. That's how you know it's good quality? She produced what looked like primitive bread slices and began spreading the dark, viscous substance across them. The smell intensified exponentially. Who wants to try some? She asked brightly, holding up the prepared samples. The response was immediate and unanimous. Students began backing away, then walking quickly toward the exits, then running. Within 30 seconds, the grand hall had cleared of everyone except Emma, myself, and 3 security guards who were apparently too shocked to move. But I brought the mild stuff. Emma called after the fleeing crowd, looking genuinely confused. Wait until you try the Bovril. I approached her cautiously, my breathing apparatus working overtime to filter the toxic miasma. Miss Blackwood, what exactly is that substance? Vegemite? Oh, it's just yeast extract. You know, leftover brewing waste mixed with salt and vitamins. Builds character, my mum always said. You eat brewing waste? Absolutely. Though I suppose it's an acquired taste. Here, try some. She thrust a piece of the contaminated bread toward me. I backed away so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. Perhaps we could move on to another aspect of your culture? Sure thing, Professor. How about I show you some of our traditional games? Emma activated her holographic display, and suddenly the hall filled with images of what could only be described as ritualized violence. This is rugby, she explained cheerfully, as the projection showed groups of humans deliberately throwing themselves at each other with apparent intent to cause bodily harm. The goal is to get the ball to the other end of the field. Simple, really. I watched in horror as human after human was tackled, trampled, and generally brutalized. Oh, Miss Blackwood, this appears to be warfare. Oh no, this is just a friendly game. You should see Australian Football League if you want to see something really intense. The projection switched to an even more chaotic scene of humans launching themselves through the air at each other. AFL players are basically flying tanks. It's beautiful to watch. They're deliberately injuring each other for entertainment. Well, yeah, it's not proper sport if no one gets hurt. Builds character, teaches you to get back up when you're knocked down. Plus, the crowd loves a good tackle. The projection showed crowds of humans cheering wildly as their fellow beings were systematically demolished on the playing field. Miss Blackwood, I said slowly, do you understand that most civilized species consider violence to be undesirable? Emma looked genuinely puzzled. But it's not violence, Professor. It's sport. There are rules and everything. No biting, no eye gouging, no deliberate attempts to permanently maim your opponent. Very civilized, really. No eye gouging is considered civilized. Well, yeah, I mean, you've got to draw the line somewhere, right? That was the moment my species' ancient survival instincts finally kicked in. The same instincts that had kept my ancestors alive through the great predator wars of the Zentorian home system. The ones that screamed, danger. Apex predator. Flee now? For the first time in my academic career, I seriously considered activating the Academy's emergency evacuation protocols. Miss Blackwood, I managed to say, perhaps we should continue this discussion later? Emma brightened. Sure thing, Professor. I've got heaps more to show you. Wait until you hear about our drop bear hunting techniques. I was already halfway to the exit before she finished the sentence. The emergency faculty meeting was called at 0800 hours the next morning. Dean Korath's expression was grim as he addressed the assembled professors. We need to discuss the human problem, he announced, his tentacles twitching with barely controlled anxiety. I'd spent the entire night researching, and what I'd found had shaken me to my very core. Dean, I said, standing up with my data pad clutched in trembling hands, I've been reviewing Earth's actual planetary classification. The room fell silent. According to the Galactic Survey Corps, Earth isn't just a hostile planet. It's classified as a Death World Level 12. I paused to let that sink in. For reference, our homeworld of Centauri Prime is classified as a Paradise World Level 1. Horrified murmurs rippled through the faculty. But here's what really terrifies me, I continued. Humans don't just survive on this planet. They thrive. They've turned a world that should have killed them into something they call the lucky country. As if summoned by our conversation, Emma appeared in the doorway. Sorry, am I interrupting? I thought I'd give one final presentation before I head home. Before anyone could object, she'd activated the room's holographic display. I wanted to explain why we Australians call our continent the lucky country, she began, that same cheerful tone that had haunted my nightmares. See, when everything around you is trying to kill you, you develop a few coping mechanisms. The projection showed humans laughing, barbecuing, and generally having a good time while surrounded by the very horrors she'd described over the past week. First, you learn to laugh at danger. What's the point of being scared all the time? Life's too short. And if a spider's going to get you, might as well go out with a smile, right? She switched to another image, humans calmly evacuating during what appeared to be a massive flood, many of them actually waving at the camera. Second, you help your neighbors. When everyone's fighting the same impossible odds, you look out for each other. It's just common sense. The final image showed a group of humans working together to rebuild after what looked like a cyclone had demolished their town. And third, you never, ever give up, because tomorrow might be the day you finally beat the odds. The room was dead silent. These weren't the actions of a primitive species. These were the most advanced survival specialists any of us had ever encountered. So that's why we call it the lucky country, Emma concluded. Not because we're lucky to live there, but because living there made us lucky enough to handle anything the universe throws at us. She reached into her bag and pulled out several packages. Anyway, I brought some parting gifts. Tim Tams for everyone, they're biscuits, don't worry, perfectly safe, and some tourism brochures in case anyone wants to visit. The brochures cover read, Australia, come and say G-Day. Below it, in smaller text, warning may contain deadly wildlife, extreme weather, and aggressive locals. Visit at your own risk. Oh, and before I forget, Emma added casually, I should mention, I'm actually from Brisbane. That's considered the safe part of Australia. The silence that followed was so profound it had its own gravitational field. As Emma left the room, humming something about waltzing with someone named Matilda, I realized the truth. Humans weren't primitive at all. They were the most advanced species in the galaxy. They'd just evolved in the opposite direction from the rest of us. While we'd developed technology to make life easier, they developed something far more valuable, the ability to make the impossible look easy. And that, I thought as I stared at the tourism brochure, was absolutely terrifying.